Hello and welcome back to Radio Free Urbanism, a podcast about urbanism and stuff.
Yeah.
I'm all solo on that one today, but we got a great show today. We have a guest, actually. Please welcome to the show, Alex Rotmensz.
Thank you guys for having me. It's a real honor.
Did I say it right? We literally rehearsed the name after.
You nailed it. You nailed it. Yeah.
And we also have a regular guest here too, Sully. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So somebody is listening to Discord. I heard a Discord beep. Is that my computer?
Oh, that was me again. That's a feature of the show now.
Yeah.
Okay, I just closed it.
Anyway, we're not gonna waste any time here. First off, we gotta know, who is Alex? Why are you here? Tell us about yourself.
All right. So I am a year out of graduating from the University of California, Santa Cruz. It was while I was studying in Santa Cruz. I was studying film and digital media. And at the time, I just got really into urbanism and architecture. And I kind of realized that was the path I wanted to go down for focusing all my efforts, my career. So at that point, I just put it in my own hands. I was like, whatever, I'll start making videos about it, build a portfolio, and start editing and learning how to edit and just talk about something I like to talk about, and just kind of built up over time. And suddenly I found myself having an audience, and an audience that I respect a lot, and I want to make sure I have content to provide for. And so suddenly I'm a YouTuber out of nowhere. It's really weird how that happens.
It's crazy how it can happen so quickly. But I mean, you're clearly putting tons of effort into it. You put out a video like every week, right?
Yeah.
And really well researched. So
thank you.
What's the main through line for your content, would you say?
I would say the main through line is that I bring an angle of American history into urbanism that I think is sort of missing from the urbanist conversation as a whole. I feel like a lot of the conversation on urbanism is very much about changing things, which is obviously very important. There's a lot to change, but without realizing that the answers are a lot of it in the past. You know, there seems to be like this obsession with reinventing the wheel, as Michael Diamond always likes to put it, whereas we have all the answers for how to make amazing, beautiful cities. We just have to, look at the places that we didn't bulldoze, I guess. So that's sort of the angle that I try to bring into it. And I think what's really compelling for people, not just learning about what we lost through the modernist era and all the destruction that's come with it, but also how beauty, which is a real big emphasis on my channel, is architectural beauty, how beauty is so central for people actually enjoying places and wanting to experience them in a way that is urbanist, right? That makes people want to walk, to get their groceries, to get their medicine, to go to work, for people to sacrifice maybe the size of their home or the size of their backyard for that urbanist lifestyle, to be closer to other people. And also, I think beauty is really important too at facilitating, not antisocial behavior, which is a very common feature, I think, in a lot of cities nowadays, unfortunately. So, yeah, I think the angle I try to take it as is sort of urbanism from the perspective of just sort of like just the average dude, that maybe just knows something about history.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't call you average. You clearly know a lot more than the average person would know about it. But the thing I really like about your content is that it does come from that architectural standpoint, and that, kind of appreciation for traditional architecture and the way we used to build cities. Because when if anybody knows me, I'm coming from transportation, I'm thinking about micromobility for most of my videos, and that's kind of my perspective. So it's cool to see it in a different light. And I'll have a question for you about a specific video that you made, because I'm actually making a video about the same city. But anyway,
oh, cool.
Sully has a bunch of questions for you. So take it away.
No, I was going to say, I think just on what you've said so far, yeah, I think you're really intentional. I mean, you even score your videos with like classical music and older music, and it's like very calming, and it's not lo-fi. It's legit classical piano.
Yeah, exactly. So, I go for the authentic stuff.
I appreciate. I'm actually going to announce right now on the podcast, one of your videos inspired me to write a song on the piano. I haven't told you that.
Whoa.
So I'm writing a song.
What?
You don't have to use it. But it was the Rising Cities thing. I'm writing a little song.
You gonna play it right now?
It's too late. I'm using it. You don't have to convince me that this. What am I using?
It fits with your channel nicely. No, but the other thing that's actually very special to me about today's episode is you guys, the two of you. I don't know which order it happened, and I could go back and look. The two of you are the first YouTubers who I ever got in touch with after starting my channel, and now you're both here
Oh, that's pretty
in
cool.
room, so to speak.
Nice.
Yeah, and Nick, I think you reached out to me, and then for me to meet Alex, I actually reached out to him, cold emailed him, and he wrote back to me because we both live in LA. You're looking at us here digitally, but we're about what 20 miles apart or something like that.
Yeah,
So,
it's still about an hour and a half in traffic, but 20 miles
yes.
apart.
Yeah, something like that. And by transit, it's an ungodly. It would probably be 6 hours.
Yeah.
Until they build the Sepulveda line, which may or may not be canceled. But please, if you're in LA, go to the public meetings. No, but yeah, no, I love your videos, and I remember I saw the Fallen Cities, which is something that I think you mentioned being an average dude. If you go to planning school, you talk about fallen cities all the time. I mean, you talk about the whole history of the freeways, and you read books on it. There's the Color of Law is a real popular book these days that talks about redlining and the destruction of neighborhoods and all that. But I remember the first time I saw one of your Rising Cities videos is when I was like, well, okay, this is something I haven't seen. Like, not even in planning school have I seen where you're focusing on cities often that I've never heard of or thought about. Right, right. Very mid-sized, small cities.
Cincinnati, what's that?
Well, Cincinnati used to be in the top 10 biggest cities in the U.S. in like 1820.
Right. So is Buffalo, which is insane.
And I want to talk about your research process, which we've talked about before. But like when you talk about these smaller, mid-sized cities, I think you did one on, was it New Haven, one of the destructed ones, or the rising one?
No, that was you see that one I did a little bit of a hybrid. I kind of like introduced. It's a new thing I'm doing. I'm introducing some of the fallenness of it, and then I end it the second half of some of the risingness. Because there's a lot of cities that kind of fall into both categories. So how do you negotiate
project
that?
by project? That's what impresses me. So I'm sure some of your viewers wonder, like, how the heck do you find particular apartment buildings that are being built or proposed even in each city?
Well, first of all, when it comes to that, I'm like a total like Google Earth nerd. I'm pretty sure that if you take all the people in the world and you like calculate the amount of time they spend on Google Earth, I'm in like the 99.99999 percentile. It's like since I was like 6 years old, geography is like how I even got into this in the first place.
Are you a GeoGuessr?
I did do that for a good while, but the thing about GeoGuessr is then it gets into like road signs and like these weird little things. I like just real geography,
Ooh, shots fired.
Yeah. What was the question? No, I'm kidding. But when it comes to researching rising cities, I would say that for me, first of all, I just go into Google Earth and I just go through like the time lapse feature. There's this other great website called Historic Aerials. And you can just see the differences. You can just go like, okay, so this block had this thing going on. Now it looks a little different. You look up that street address, look up the roads around there, look up the iconic buildings near there. Usually something comes up. You also would be surprised if you just look up like listed development projects in X city. There's a lot of things that come up for that. Usually like a local paper will have an article that goes over like 4 or 5 things. And then, you find like maybe 4 or 5 of those and you have a list of like 15 projects to work with. It actually surprisingly happens fast, like maybe like 2 hours of research and I have enough projects to go ahead with the video. And I usually just check my work by just going back into Google Earth and seeing if I missed anything. Sometimes I'll use like there's like a color filler tool on there and I'll just like kind of fill it all in, make it nice and organized for myself to work with. So yeah, the Rising Cities videos are the ones that are actually probably the shortest to edit, but the longest to research. Because the editing is pretty easy. You just find all the renderings, throw them on there, sequence it, and it's good to go. But the research, it definitely takes a while.
Yeah. So it's just the answer is patience, in other words. And focus.
Yeah. But I at this point, like if you notice on my channel, I have like 4 or 5 formulas of video at this point. So I kind of have them all down to a T, and I can get them out. So I kind of know what to expect going into it. And honestly, a lot of it is because a lot of it's just my audience. Like my audience actually provides a lot of information for me. Like for example, my Bucharest video. So I wish I remembered his name, but he emailed me this extremely thorough email. He was like a Romanian architectural student who was super passionate about the history of Bucharest. And he sent me like articles and pictures and like these long descriptions. And it's like, I was just really thankful. And made the process of the video much smoother to do, because I don't think I would have tackled Bucharest just like cold turkey on my own if it wasn't for that. And even just like in my comments, I had like someone the other day, like for that New Haven video, like in their comment, they just listed like 7 projects that were in development. I'm like, oh, there we go. Like I don't even have to like get that into it. And these people are helping me out a lot. So I think like there's just a huge community at this point who are into this kind of thing. And we all just want to help each other out because we want the message to spread, right? Like at the end of the day, like the channel is just a message. I say the same thing over and over again, but it's an important thing to say over and over again. Most people still haven't heard it. So I think we're all just kind of in the fight together.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Did you have a question or comment, Nick? I didn't want to interrupt you.
Well, I just love that repeating a message, especially. And I know it's kind of cliche, especially with politicians and the way that they slogan, but it is important because it really sticks. And it's something that, just a layperson who just might have seen 1 or 2 of your videos, it might just stick with them, and it can come out in conversations in their own life, which is really important. These things are important as much as we're a biased crew here. We're really into it, but it is.
Right.
It affects everybody every day.
Right. And so, okay, I have a question for you to take a step back, because that was a very specific question about how you research videos. But like you said, you were studying video production.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have made videos about anything, presumably.
Right.
So what? And you were in Santa Cruz. So you're in the middle of the woods. It wasn't the most urbanist location. Yeah. I've been to that campus. So
it's the
what
least
exactly?
Urbanist campus.
No, and it's all spread out and weird. My mom went there actually for a year.
Oh, really?
She didn't like it, so she transferred. So I actually went there with her, and she told me she had a secret bathroom that she found that no one else knew about. And we found it. It's still there, and it was full of leaves. But that was just nobody still knows about it. Yeah, it was some.
I must
weird
know this bathroom is. My brothers still go there. I need to know.
Yeah, it was next to like a sports, like an unused sports facility away from all the dorms somewhere. Very weird.
Weird.
But yeah, we could use Google Earth and find
Nick, you got to check out Santa Cruz. It's actually very bikeable. It's one of the more bikeable towns in the country, and definitely e-bike type of town though, because Santa Cruz, the campus at least, is just on a massive slope. So
yeah, I'm looking at it. The University of California, Santa Cruz.
Yeah, it's the most weird spread out campus ever. It is beautiful though. Like if you love nature, which I think everyone does, it looks nice.
But it looks very spread out. It's
not particularly near the town either, right? It's like behind it. But anyway, the point of my question was like, what happened? Like, what was your? I think a lot of people online who become urbanists, they have a moment. Was it a trip? Was it almost getting hit by a car? Like, what was the sort of inspiration for you?
For me, it was probably just growing up in the Valley. And the Valley, meaning the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles. It's kind of the quintessential suburb in many ways. If you watch a lot of like 70s and 80s movies that take place in the suburbs, it's usually just somewhere in the Valley.
E.T.
E.T. or Malcolm in the Middle, whatever, stuff like that. And Modern Family. I can keep going. But the thing about the Valley, especially when you're a kid, is it's very uninspiring. There's just not a lot to be proud of in the Valley because it's just wide roads, parking lots, freeways, mini malls, ugly architecture. There's pockets of walkability. I would say like some parts of Studio City are actually some of the best urbanism that LA has to offer, actually. But that's like 1% of the Valley. The rest of it's just a hot mess, really. And as a kid, I was really into documentaries about different cultures around the world and different cities around the world. I got really into geography and Google Earth. And, so at some point you go like, why am I so fascinated by every other place in the world other than where I live? That seems kind of backwards. And I guess I kind of carried into me being obsessed with the idea of moving to Europe during high school and into college. And then through there, I guess the algorithm found me, and then I got a Not Just Bikes video in my YouTube feed. And then I was like, oh, that's why. Because urbanism is one of those things where it's like a bug. If you don't see it, you don't see it. But then the second you realize it, it changes the way you see the world forever. And you can't unsee it. You can't get over it. That's why it's so important to it's I don't know if it's unfortunate. I think it's actually pretty cool that to know like why I like a place,
Yeah. It'd be nice if I could just stop like obsessing over and walking down a street and be like, that guy's parked illegally. This is dangerous. Like just little things like that.
Well, I was doing that anyways, but at least
ignorance is bliss, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, like the average person in the valley would have already lost your train. Like they wouldn't even know what you were talking about.
Right.
You know what I mean?
No,
They're like, what do you mean?
I've literally met people that were like, I love the valley. And I'm like, why? Like, what do you know?
They'll say it's quiet. No, people, I've asked that too, and I've gotten answers. They'll say it's quiet. They'll say it's safe. They'll say it's green. You know, you can have a yard. You know, they have answers, but I think, again, without trying to sound elitist, they don't, like you said in the beginning of the show, if you sacrifice a yard, you can actually get in a walkable neighborhood. But they've never thought about it that way, so they might not know even.
But that's also relative to the fact that the sacrifice that we provide, like in America, is not a very good one. It's not, you don't really get a lot for what you give. So, for example, in Europe, if you live in a beautiful home on the canal in Utrecht, you're getting even though you're living in a small townhouse, you're getting quite a lot for where you do live. Whereas if you live in some apartment in, I don't know, Playa Vista, I don't really know what you're really benefiting from that. You would much rather just live in a house if you had a family. So I think that's where the architecture and certain classical elements of urbanism come back into play. But yeah, it really just goes back to being in the valley. Why does it suck? Why do I not like it? Finding not just bikes, eventually finding the aesthetic city, Michael Diamant, and just kind of my whole world was answered. You know, the big conundrum of my life, like, all came together. And it was one of those things where it was almost like a moment where it was like, okay, this is what I care about, because I know I'm like the one person out of 1,000 people that are going to care about this. And just based on that alone, I just have to go for it.
And then you took a trip. You did. So you got all the inspiration even before you went to Europe, because some people, that trip is the thing that inspires them.
Yes. So I did want to move to Europe anyways, just because I just love culture and travel. Even though I never actually really did get to travel until I was much older. So it was until after I discovered all the urbanist stuff where I was like, okay, now I definitely have to go travel, because that just made me want to leave America even more. And so I went to Amsterdam, of course, because that's like, you know, it's like pilgrimage if you're an urbanist. Yeah, exactly. And I loved it. It was great. And then a couple of years later, I studied in London for like one semester. It was like part of a program at UC Santa Cruz. So, and that experience actually made me realize I didn't want to live in Europe. It made me realize I wanted to stay in America and fight for urbanism here, and not just kind of like move away and you know, like laugh at Americans as I'm leaving.
What made you feel like that? Yeah, I like that.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Different.
Oh, sorry.
So why is that? Why did you feel like you didn't want to live in Europe?
Well, at the end, I mean, this is a little bit away from urbanism, I guess, but at the end of the day, like, I am American. I'm a really American person. Like, I'm very patriotic, and I know so much about like our country's history, and I really love all of our traditions and cultures and values. So I just realized I can never be the foreigner in a foreign land, not for longer than 3 months at least. And also thinking about my kids and my future family, it's like I got to be home with my family, with my friends, and with people who are like-minded to me. You really notice big cultural differences when you live somewhere for a very long time, and longer just than for a few days on vacation, right? So I think that was the main thing. And also there is a lot to love about our country, even from an urbanist standpoint. We do have a really great history of building some beautiful buildings and cities. We might have torn down a lot of it, but we still did it. You know, it's still in the DNA. So, and it would be a shame to just give up on it at the end of the day. So
I like that. That's awesome.
Very strong Towns answer. Yeah, no, it's interesting because you mentioned that your gateway drug, I mean, now they call it orange pill, right? Because of Not Just Bikes. And actually, the joke I made in the past is I don't know how much he's like, the tourism board of Amsterdam should pay. Like,
yeah, totally.
Do you think have gone there specifically? It's got to be thousands, right?
Yeah, no, it's
like
I did. Yeah.
There should honestly be like an urbanist hotel there or something.
There's a big check that they owe him for sure.
Yeah,
he's brought them so much money in commerce.
I think that his channel is the gateway drug. I still think it's a fantastic channel to show people who don't know, and it would be a good channel to show your neighbors in the valley, for instance.
Right.
But then I think it's interesting how people, once they get to his channel, then they start to self-sort into more and more specific urbanist content.
Right.
After that, you know.
Yeah.
Like, you figure out if you're a bike guy or an architecture guy or whatever, a tram guy.
It's a great gateway drug for sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I've tried to send it to some people and some people do get it and they think it's interesting, but I've sent it to other people. Even my one friend who lives in fake London, Ontario, he's actually Dutch. He's never been to the Netherlands, but he was like, he watched 2 minutes of it. He's like, this is boring. I was like, all right, well, not for you, apparently. Keep driving your big old truck.
It's individuals, but I think most people are it is a very compelling channel. Like the way he speaks, the way he edits, the whole thing is actually really well done. And I do take a lot of inspiration from it because even though he is an engineer and he is able to break down all these micro transit elements in really deep ways, at the end of the day, the way he presents himself is like the average dude that kind of just encountered urbanism and cycling and that sort of thing. So I try to kind of take that angle, but just from a more architectural and historical perspective.
So, okay, you hit on something. It just so happens to be one of the things I really wanted to ask you during today's podcast, because I mentioned people self-sort. I think one thing I don't think has ever been mentioned on a Not Just Bikes video is architecture specifically.
Right.
Nick, I don't think you've ever mentioned architecture.
No, that is not in my wheelhouse at all.
And then you mentioned, Alex, the aesthetic city, which is about architecture, but doesn't mention, I don't think, transit or other aspects of urbanism. So your channel is really an interesting mix of both. I haven't seen so much, to the point where, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that one of your main contentions is that there isn't good urbanism without beautiful architecture. Like, you're not willing to take the boxy buildings in a walkable environment, right? Like you want that architecture too. And so I'm wondering if you could explain your thesis. Like, why is that? Because I actually talked to an urbanist. I won't name him, but he's an urbanist creator, and he disagrees with you. He's like, no, I think modern architecture can get the job done as long as it's, surrounded by parkland and bike paths and subway systems. Like, who cares what the buildings look like? So, like, why that?
It's tricky because even that whole framing is like, I think urbanism is so much more complicated than people want it to be, because it kind of is turned into this thing where it's like there's urbanism and there's architecture, and of course there's a lot of overlap, and there's also just things that don't really fall into either category either. I can give an example. So there's this one really interesting town in Indiana called, I mispronounced it in the video, but I forgot what the right pronunciation is, but Carmel or Carmel, it's one of the two. And they use a lot of classical architecture, and they have elements that are quote unquote good urbanism. And I actually ran into a couple of people that live there, like just by coincidence. And I work with Dr. Nir Burras, who has some not very charitable things to say about Carmel, and he's a classical architect. And it's because even if the urbanism on paper is good urbanism, and even if the architecture on paper is classical architecture or good architecture, whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of in-between stuff too. There's a lot of in-between because there's a big difference in, not opinion, but in ways that you can go about these things. For example, there's a lot of people who will look at a road where it's trams going down the middle, a bike lane outside of that, and then a car lane outside of that, and then a row of shrubbery outside of that, and then sidewalk, and then that's the road. And for some people, that's like the epitome of urbanism. But then it's like, if you go to London, or like old London, or if you go to, I don't know, choose your classical city, like Marseille or Lyon, where's that road in the middle of classical Lyon? If that's supposedly the epitome of urbanism, how is it that if you look at the most beautiful classical cities in the world, they don't have things like that? So,
well, they're on the outskirts, I would argue.
They're on the outskirts, but those are not the amazing, beautiful parts that people look up to and respect. That's not the, when people talk about like Granada or Cordoba or Barcelona, they're not talking about the wide road that has the tram down the middle, even though we call that really good urbanism.
This is one maybe I'm thinking about, sorry to interrupt you, but like I'm thinking of Paris and I can't pronounce it. Champs-Élysées, like the big giant street with a huge monument in the middle.
Exactly.
Right? Like filled with cars. And it still is to this day, even though the changes they've made. But yeah, that's
right. And for me, like the wide boulevards of Paris, people will praise them. I think those are the worst parts of Paris. And I spent one day in Paris when I was in London for 3 months, and I did love it. I loved it more than I thought I would. But what's the term that they call the boulevards there? There's like a certain.
I'm not sure.
I think boulevard. I think that's the French word.
Yeah, I guess boulevard, right? It is a French word.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're actually not. I didn't find them to be that interesting. I was like, oh, I just feel like I'm back home. Even if they do have like a tram down the middle or something like that. I think Amsterdam has like a road that's like that too on the outskirts. So people will call that good urbanism, but for me, that's still, even if the architecture is good, just that way of going about it, I still don't even think is good urbanism. So there's a huge range of ways you can approach urbanism, even if you're having a urbanist mentality going into it. So to say whether architecture is necessary for it to be good or bad urbanism, it's like there needs to be more than just architecture involved. So, and another example of that is I think about Japan, and you take a city like Tokyo, which does not have good architecture, I would say, but it has everything else. Well, you don't agree?
No, you're right. I was like, it does
Right.
not. It's
No,
a
it doesn't
big
have good
mishmash
architecture.
of things. Yeah.
But it also doesn't have like, I don't know, it somehow every other element, I think it gets correct. And so I would say in that scenario, Tokyo has great urbanism, even though it has bad architecture.
Yeah.
So I guess architecture isn't contingent for it to be good urbanism. However, when it comes to America and Americans and trying to convince people to live a more urbanist lifestyle and away from car centricity, architecture 100% needs to be part of that conversation. I think the reason why NIMBYism even exists in the first place is because of modern architecture and just how appalling it is. And I don't blame people who live in a nice neighborhood with houses that are, attractive or decently good. And suddenly a developer wants to build like some big giant gray box on their corner. I do not blame people at all. I mean, of course, NIMBYism is very annoying and it's caused the housing crisis and all this sort of thing. But I do think it's actually at the fault of how terrible modern architecture is that we even have a problem where people are scared of development at all. So for that reason alone, I say that we need to incorporate architecture into the conversation of urbanism, not necessarily because you need really good architecture to have great urbanism.
But it works in America. Because that's the best way to make it work.
It would work in America, and that's where we live. So, yes.
So I agree and disagree. Not to just have this be a softball interview. So I'll give you something to think about.
Let's go for it.
So first of all, I do want to agree with you and say for any modernist listening, okay, obviously I respect your intellectual freedom. I did an architecture program. The listeners learn a little bit of tidbit about me every episode. So yeah, I did an architecture program for a little while, and I hated it because the only thing they taught was modern architecture. And I could even respect a program that did the comprehensive, like if we started in prehistory, when people were living in caves and decorating it, and we went all the way through modern. But the program I was in, the oldest building we looked at was built in 1922, and it was Bauhaus. And to me, what's weird about that is Bauhaus was a reaction to the thing before it, but we were only learning about the reaction. And so for any modernists out there who might be listening to this or whatever, I mean, enough surveys have been done, and you can even do it casually in your life. Just show people a modern building and an older, more traditional building. It doesn't actually have to be older. It just has to be what you might call traditional architecture. And it's about 80% of people prefer the traditional stuff. So I think there's data there that supports that. I have a close friend who's a traditionalist architect, and he doesn't even like calling it styles. He just likes calling it the mode of building that developed over time in places as a reaction to the materials that were available and the weather. So, terracotta tiles are seen as traditionalists, but they're from Southern Europe because that's where the clay deposits were available, and you didn't need slate roofs because it doesn't snow, and so it's like, that's sort of why they're terracotta tiles. And so it's like, okay, similar climates, it makes sense to have it. But anyway, the thing where I'll question your contention a little bit is I used to think what you're saying was true about that. The architecture could sort of solve the NIMBYism, but I've seen two things. One, I've seen the sort of the cramming in of non-traditionalist elements into like a parking garage hole.
Right.
And they'll put filigrees around it or something and call it traditional, which doesn't solve the problem that half of your sidewalk is a sloped ramp with cars coming in and out of it. And the other thing I've seen, in Santa Barbara, we have the second strictest architectural rules in the country. Second, the first being Charleston. So you can't build anything in the entire downtown unless it's white with a tile roof. And specifically the window sashes, there's only 5 colors you can pick from, and even the proportions, and it has to go through a review board of traditionalist architects. And so basically, when you propose a new building in Santa Barbara, there's a guarantee it's going to look like it's 150 years old. Like it's going to go through this rigorous process. And yet we still have insane NIMBYism. Like, it doesn't matter how beautiful the building is. You can go on nextdoor.com. You can go to the public comments during the meetings. And if the building is more than 2 stories tall, it's called a skyscraper. It's going to block the views, right? Like, people seem much more obsessed with the massing and also with the externalities. They say, no matter how this building looks, more people means more cars on my street and stuff like that. So I think it's part of the puzzle. But anyway, I don't know what your reaction to that is, but that's my kit.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. But I think that's just car brain. I think that's just 3 generations of people who've just lived a certain lifestyle and cannot possibly imagine any other way working. But I still think that even then, you're also coming from Santa Barbara, where like it's already a beautiful city. So you've reached like a ceiling of like almost of like NIMBYism or of urbanism in a sense. Whereas I think if you take a suburb of Dallas, I think you're just starting at a much lower place. And so something like traditional architecture is a way to just leapfrog a place forward. And now you're not going to get to 100%, but you could get to like 90%. And I would argue that Santa Barbara is at like 90%. Maybe someone from Santa Barbara wouldn't agree because your standards are going to be higher. But from the perspective of the rest of the country,
no, that's true.
I think that's probably what it is.
What I'm wondering, though, is like, as far as architecture influences people, like, obviously the people have different preferences and what they'd like to hang out in. But I have a feeling that if you did go down that avenue where you wanted to make it look more traditional, at least fitting in with the local style, as I might say, it would create an environment that might be more welcoming to a better urban environment anyway. I don't know, like if you just made gray boxes everywhere, it might be a less pleasant place to hang out. But then again, people hang out like on a patio in a parking lot at a cafe. So I don't know. Maybe it doesn't matter. It's just about where the amenities are.
I guess it's also just like a matter of scarcity, though. So I think that's the other thing. And also, when people want to hang out in a patio for parking lot, it's usually not to do something that you would want to do in public in front of a lot of people. You know, it's usually how it goes. But when it comes to like even the science of it, so classical architecture across different societies, across different countries, continents even, it breaks down into fractals and facade divisions and parts that align with the ratios that you'll see in nature. So like trees or plants. And so it makes classical buildings more readable, which is why if you go to like a city like London, New York, that a building can be a certain height, but feel shorter than a building that actually is shorter, but is built in a modern style. Because if you look at a modernist building, maybe it's just like a long wall of like, or a tall wall of just concrete. It's very stressful and unreadable for your mind to comprehend because you don't see things like that in nature that often. Whereas a classical building that has a lot of parts and divisions and it's kind of done at a human scale, it's very easy for your brain to actually read that, absorb that, and it lowers your stress level. And it actually makes a building that may even be taller than the modernist building be more pleasant to be around. So I think when it comes to people's behavior, people will gravitate towards traditional architecture and actually want to spend time around traditional architecture just for the scientific subconscious reason alone that they are just easier buildings for us to read and to process and absorb than around modernist buildings. And also the materials being local and of the environment is very important. A big theme in modernist architecture is processed materials, right? It's these purified metals and concrete. It's just, it feels like you're not in nature. Whereas when, like, how do I put this? Like, if you're in an Italian villa, it almost feels like it like grew out of the ground, right? It feels like it was like part of that space forever. Whereas when you're in a modernist city, you kind of feel like this place was once land and forests and grass, and we plopped a city on top of it, right? There's that big disconnect from nature, from the environment, that you just don't get in a classical environment.
I'm dubbing that the Courtyard Marriott effect. Because you can go to any city in the US and the Courtyard Marriott looks exactly the same. It's the same. They literally, when they do the franchise, they sell there's one floor plan you can buy. I learned this, And there are three color schemes to pick from: the fall, the spring, or the summer.
Right.
And like that's what all the pillows and all the wallpaper and all the towels, they follow one of those three. And so yeah, it's like you don't know what city you're in. You're in a Courtyard Marriott, and that's just how they look.
It's like SimCity when you place down the same police station every 3 blocks, you know?
Yes, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
yeah.
I think symmetry, and it's important to mention it's cross-cultural, right? Like if you look at the Forbidden City in Beijing, or a Greek temple, or a Mayan pyramid, all these cultures came down to symmetry. Like that's all sort of when they built their monumental structures. And so clearly it's something we like. And I get it. You know, modernists, you always want to invent the next new interesting thing. And so at some point in human history, it makes sense for people to say, well, what if we didn't do symmetry? And we've done that for about 100 something years. And I don't know. I don't know
think
if
it's worked.
Yeah, I don't think it's, and I don't mean, by the way, I don't mean that every building has to be bilaterally symmetrical, but at least, I mean, there are beautiful buildings that aren't, but the elements of the building should be like the doorways, right? It makes things, but to have no rhyme or reason on a building at all, that's where, which, for instance, they're building the new LACMA building, which I don't even know why they need. It has less gallery space than the older one from the 60s.
Right.
But they tore whatever. It's called the amoeba because it's purposefully amoeba shaped. It has there's no point where you could stand and see the whole building or understand it. I mean, the only cool thing about it is that they're building it over a road, which is kind of awesome.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's like, yeah, it's not, it doesn't feel monumental. And also it's just a big missed opportunity for many reasons.
Yeah. I definitely agree, but everyone likes a sky bridge. Those are always cool. And, you know, I've made this point like really early on in my channel, which is that, is there like the 1% of modern buildings that are pretty cool in what they're trying to do, and on their own, they could stand and be a thing? Of course. But the thing is, that's not 99.9% of modernist buildings. And usually when people defend modern architecture, they pick these exceptions, but exceptions like make a rule. Yeah, exactly.
Which I think is a cool building.
No, I can totally understand that. It's not even like really a building, right? Like it's kind of more of a monument than it is a building. At least I think so. But even the other part of that, I lost my train of thought.
No, you're good. We're talking about a lot of stuff at the same time.
Well, can I ask a question? Because I wanted to go down this line of historic buildings. So I watched your video about Detroit. I think it was called America's Fallen Cities, which is a series that you do of different of cities. And you talk about the history of the once wealthiest city in the world. I grew up nearby, like across the river in Canada.
Okay.
But you talk about how it crumbled down. So I want to ask you about something you said in the video. So I'm actually just going to share just this little excerpt that you had mentioned.
Here we go. About to get exposed.
The known small-scale renaissance in downtown Detroit doesn't quite have the appreciation of the past, let alone the ambition to rebuild the beauty of the past that would allow for the Paris of the West to rise again in its former glory.
So I love that, because like when you do look at old photos of Detroit, you really see that. Like it's unreal how much it's changed. So I was there just last year, which is funny because I'm just finishing making a video finally. And the first thing that you say in the video is, "This is Detroit." And that's actually the first how I started the video. But anyway, excellent video. I wanted to ask you,
thank you.
If Detroit isn't doing that, the architects in there aren't doing that. They're not harkening back to the way it used to look, even though there are some old buildings still there. But generally, that's not the case. The new buildings look very modern. What cities are doing that, are trying to harken back to the beauty of the past?
It's funny because you actually just, through that, reminded me of what I was going to say, which is that the other really important part of classical architecture is it brings identity to a place, because people in life need to feel like their life has a purpose to it. So they live in some like no-name place that has no identity to it, that really deprives from the soul. And that's the thing about Detroit. It's like, sure, they are rebuilding. That's great on its own. But the fact that they're rebuilding unlike how Detroit's supposed to look, and just kind of building like how they're building everywhere else, it still is not going to have the soul that Detroit would have had before, even if it is being rebuilt. So what city is doing that right? I would say it's a very easy answer. It's what most people would probably say, but Charleston in South Carolina. Now, the thing about Charleston is it's not doing that much development, so I can't really give it like 5 stars because it's very minimal how much development is happening there. It's kind of confined to like one small area, but every building that's coming out of there is pretty amazing. I had a great opportunity to go and visit about a year ago, actually, because I have some family in the Carolinas, and it is like even better in person than it does look in the photos, which is rare because that's the one thing about modern architecture is that it always looks great in photos and magazines and renders. And people are like, how can you be against this? Look how cool this is. But it's like, yeah, but the point of a building is just you're supposed to walk by it every day, which we kind of forgot about. But in Charleston, like when you're actually next to these new buildings that they are building, they are really incredible and they are honoring to the T, like where they are and how they're supposed to function. So right now, Charleston, they're doing a lot of development in the northern part of the peninsula, which was always historically a more industrial part of the town. So what you're getting is these sort of like industrial style buildings that still incorporate that kind of classical Charleston aesthetic. Like you're getting this really cool hybrid. And this is another thing, which is that people say that if we always follow traditional and classical architecture, we'll never be able to innovate and create new things. But here in Charleston, they're literally creating a new style that's been unseen anywhere else. Meanwhile, modernists are building the same glass square 1,000 times over. But in Charleston, they're building, I forgot the name of the project. I think it's called the Line Street Project. And it's literally a crossover between sort of like traditional Charleston architecture and American industrial architecture, just because of the specific location it's in. And I think that is like the coolest thing. And that's like the way architecture is supposed to work, that you out of these classical principles, out of these classical styles, you combine them, you mix and match them in a different, unique way. As time goes on, you're constantly innovating, creating new aesthetics and styles and buildings.
It's beautiful to see. That's a city I'm not very familiar with, but I'm just rolling through photos as you're talking.
Highly recommend it. I highly recommend it. There's always like the same photo of like that one strip of rainbow houses, but that is like one little thing. The whole city is just a gem. I say whole city, the old city. Outside the peninsula where most of the people live, it's just kind of, American South suburbia. But the actual peninsula is amazing. Honestly, I think
it's old.
It's well, right? It's not just because it's old though, like it actually is really beautiful. Like when you're just there, regardless of age. I really couldn't care less about how old the building is. I do in a historical sense, but not in like an enjoyment sense.
Right. Yeah. Which I was going to ask you, do you think new buildings, because another excuse I've heard is that imitating those styles is too expensive. I don't know if if you've looked into that. Is that true? Because obviously in Charleston, they're imitating it. So like, what's the deal there?
Mm-hmm. So it's yes and no. There are like just a lot of things in the modern world that were once cheaper to do that are now more expensive to do. But a lot of that's just because of demand and the way that practices have gone. So ever since it kind of became industry standard to have modernist buildings, the whole sort of construction and materials industry just adapted to that. So obviously it's going to be more expensive to build classical now because the infrastructure just isn't there for it. But I do know that there are a lot of companies who are new and they're trying to make classical architecture more affordable, more approachable. There's this one company, I think they're in Utah, and they just do like moldings for like cornices, for like columns and windowsills, stuff like that. These little detailing things. And the way that I think they make it cheaper is they just have like a bunch of like just standard molds, and they just do the same mold, 1,000 times over, and you can buy it at the bulk and that sort of thing. It's not perfect. It's not as good as it once was, 100 years ago, but at the same time, it's happening and slowly. But I think it is more. It's not more expensive because it's always going to be more expensive. I would say that, for example, we build a lot slower in 2025 than they did in 1880 when everything was classical. And in 1880, within 10 years, a city like St. Louis would have doubled its population or something crazy like that. So cities used to build and expand much more quickly when everything was classical and when there was no technology like there is now. So to say if it's more or less expensive, I think it's just more of I don't think it's like such a definite thing. It's very dependent on the way that the market is at the moment. And I've seen a lot of people make the argument that it's actually not more expensive. And especially because a lot of these super modern buildings, like take, for example, the LACMA one, like how many $100 million is this LACMA building?
A lot.
So I can maybe say an argument for like just like the average like row house or the average commercial building. But for these huge grand buildings that we're building that are super modernist and ugly, to say that it would be more or less expensive is like irrelevant because they're already spending tons of money on these projects.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as it's not the what is it, the Capitol building of Romania, the most expensive building, like pure marble. But no, I think, and something people don't know, and I was actually reading about this today, happened to come up.
Yeah.
In the late 1800s, classical art, during the Industrial Revolution started in the early 1800s, and by the end, classical elements actually had been industrialized. This is something that modern architects were rebelling against. They thought that classical elements had become disingenuous because they were made in factories, so why do them at all? Is actually the and that movement happened in Germany, where they were like, this is disingenuous architecture, because in the medieval era and in the Roman era, it was hand carved, and so it actually represented someone's work. But by 1880, all the moldings on all the buildings in Berlin were actually churned out of a press, basically. And so, which is funny because when you go back and look at them today, the average tourist thinks that they're all like art made or handmade or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, I don't have the same problem that personally, I don't know if you do. I don't mind if the elements are classically made in the same way that anything. Yeah, I'm sorry, is industrial made in the same way that anything is. I think that we save and we do this now even with modern architecture to a much lesser degree, where we save like our most famous architect, like Frank Gehry. He designs the Opera House. But back in the day, it was like when a great example is like the Santa Barbara Courthouse. They did not industrialize the decorations. They had over 300 artists work on one building. So there was a team of 100 stonemasons who carved every capital. There was a team of dozens of painters who were commissioned to do paintings and tapestries. There was a company that did hand-painted tiles, right? So your monumental buildings, as late as 1927, which is when that building was built, that was where you reserved that, and that was expensive, right? It would be. It would be still today. But like, why not?
But notice it's still standing 100 years later, and no one's thinking about tearing it down anytime soon. I mean, these things are worth it.
It's a historic monument. This is the ironic thing, right? Every single thing down to the last doorknob is like preserved. Like they can't even change the locks without the Historic Society coming and doing the whole thing. It's like and so it's and people talk about what are we all going to do once AI takes our jobs? Well, there were 300 artist jobs that it took 3 years to build the building.
Exactly.
Can't do that.
No, this is true. By the way, on that point about how the reason why modernist architecture became a thing in the first place was because they rebelled against the industrialization of classical architecture. Find me the modernist neighborhood or street or building in this country, I guess, that isn't industrialized in the way that it was built.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty much at this point every house just like built chosen from a catalog of like 5 different houses, and then people just choose one.
I may have misstated. They rebelled against it being industrialized by saying, if things are going to be industrialized, let's show that element off of the building. That was Bauhaus. And let's show off the why are we? So it's even worse. Yeah. They were like, we might as well show the industrialized balconies and windows and all this stuff. Why are we trying to cover? They called it. There's a German word for it, which I can't remember, because all this intellectual stuff emerged in Germany in architecture. But yeah, they called it something like a fake face, where it was like you're covering up the industry with. You're trying to pretend we're still in classical times, but we're not.
Facade.
I see.
Yeah, and so it that's why they were upset about it, if that makes sense. But yeah, it ended up with just looking worse. It's still not a good argument.
It's funny. I mean, they went through World War I, so I honestly don't even blame them that much. That must have been pretty terrible. So
yeah. So okay, because we're getting a long time, I do want to talk about something a little interesting with you, which is you mentioned you went to Amsterdam, but you did not ride a bike. Nick, obviously, his whole shtick is bikes.
Oh,
so
no.
This is two very different. So I want to hear what's up with you and bikes.
Yeah, what the hell? I'm angry.
I'm going to reveal something that's very embarrassing and I'm ashamed of it, to be honest. But this will make a short for your YouTube channel, so it'll be good. I've maybe ridden a bike like 3 times in my entire life. So that is the main reason. So I actually didn't learn how to ride a bike till I was 13 or something, when I like forced my parents to teach me, or rather have me take a lesson to learn how to ride a bike, which is Yeah. I would say that the main reason for that, honestly, is actually the valley. Like, this is not a place where you can just let your kid ride a bike wherever. Like, that your kid's going to get run over by somebody going 50 miles per hour 1 block away from your house. Like, that's just what it is. You don't see people riding bikes around here. Like, that's just not a thing. Maybe at a park or something, but it's like, that's such a hassle. So it was just never convenient, and it just never made any sense, I guess. I mean, I know that you're supposed to just teach your kid how to ride a bike, like, just in principle. But my parents worked hard. They didn't have time for that, I guess. But
Well, yeah. Well, the juxtaposition to the historic ideal of the valley, right? You think about, I don't know, one of my favorite movies is The Sandlot, and that's I don't think they filmed it there, but that's where it's supposed to take place, right? In the valley. They're riding their bikes everywhere. They're walking. They're going to play baseball in the sand lot around in somebody's backyard or something like that. And it's just it's not the case anymore. That's too bad. But how did you get around when you were in Amsterdam?
Oh, I just walked or took the metro or took the tram. I mean, I love walking. When I went to Antwerp, I think I did like 50,000 steps that day because I didn't realize I was going to like Antwerp that much, so I just kept walking.
That's huge.
Yeah, I know.
Antwerp is cool. Antwerp is like the grungy Netherlands.
Yeah, no, it is. It's like this hidden, because I went to Brussels first, right? And I was like, oh, okay, so Belgium's like not that cool. And then I went to Antwerp. I'm like, oh, there we go. This is what I was looking for.
Also, totally best kosher Ashkenazi food I've ever had in my life was in Antwerp.
In Antwerp.
So good.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Oh, yeah. I wish I knew at the time. I would have gone. But I would say though, I would have ridden a bike in the Netherlands. I was actually planning on it because I watched Not Just Bike's video about how much easier it is to ride a Dutch bike and everything. And then I saw how fast and confident everybody was, and how there's just, all the roads there are pretty narrow. So like there's just no room for error at all. And I'm like, all right, so never mind on that one. I don't feel like
there's
going
not a lot
to a
of
Dutch hospital.
To simply adjust, especially in Amsterdam, like around rush hour. Like there's so many people riding bikes everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
Houghton. He missed Houghton.
Houghton's super chill.
Yeah,
but Nick, what would you suggest? What should what should his regimen be to get him to be as big of a bike nerd as us?
You don't have to. But
I appreciate.
I don't know. I don't know how do you do that? I don't know. I'll just send you my history of videos that I've watched. Just ignore all of the ones that have to do with hockey and like cooking, and then you'll get there, I suppose.
I suggest the Venice Beach. In the valley, actually, there's a very nice bike path, the Chandler Bikeway. But that's, I mean, the valley's gigantic, so it's in one part of the valley.
Right.
But yeah,
rail. I mean,
the real thing is, honestly, you don't have to ride a bike. Nobody has to ride a bike.
Right.
You went to Amsterdam. They have a great metro. They got trams. They got buses more on the outskirts too. There's great public transit, and it's very walkable.
Right.
You don't have to, and I think that's a really good sticking point. It's especially something we have to contend with when we're talking about making cycling more safe and more appealing, especially is people will say, well, I can't do XYZ or whatever. My grandmother can't ride a bike, or I'm disabled. I have a leg that doesn't work. I can't ride a bike. You don't have to. And that's an important thing to remember, I think.
I definitely agree. And I know Zoe will disagree with me on this a little bit, but I do think that the urbanist movement does focus a little bit too much on bikes. And for the average American, that is very unappealing because people are like, I drive a car. Why would I just ride a bike? Why would I ride a bike instead if I have a car? It just doesn't make any sense. And it's not even historically rooted. Like, it's not even like people go, people did used to ride bikes everywhere all the time. It's like they didn't. People walked everywhere, or they took the tram. Of course, there was more bike riding, but it's not like how the car is today. It was just one of the ways people would get around. It wasn't the way or the primary way. The streets weren't designed for it.
Yeah, it wasn't even like it is in the Netherlands or close to it. I think some of the peaks you'll see in the United States will be usually on the West Coast, and usually it was like as much as 11% or something like that. It wasn't like these crazy. Like Amsterdam, I think, is like 16 or 18, somewhere around that percent, and that's pretty low for Dutch standards. You go up to like Groningen, and it gets up to like 50 or 60%.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. It wasn't like this the mode to get around.
Right.
It was walking.
It was definitely more there is a history. My city council member pointed something out. I do want to correct. There's a map of Santa Barbara from 1898, and you know how maps back then would put like the biggest attractions in the city around the edges. Like they would have little drawings of the big hotel, the city hall. One of the drawings, there's only room for like 12 of them. One of them was the bike shop. So it was a big enough deal to get onto that map.
Okay.
You know, in LA, we had there was a huge separated bike path that was built from Pasadena all the way into LA before there was the Automobile Club, there was the Bicycle Club of California, and they built this huge pathway, which is long since gone. So it was popular, and you can look back at the, Central Park, that it got so full of bikes in the 1890s that it was actually difficult to walk there at some point.
Right.
I saw an old article. So definitely there was bike mania before there was car mania in the gay 90s, as they call them. That's what they call them at the time. We forget people had names for decades.
The gay 90s.
Yeah, they're called the gay 90s.
That's funny.
And so no, biking was a big thing. But no, the reason I'm so into it, this is my contention. This is where, maybe I disagree with you, is I think when we were talking about urbanism, this can lead us to our last question I want to ask you, is like when we talk about transforming American cities in various ways to get back, like you said, we are going back.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at these old pictures and saying we want this again. So in that way, it is a historicist movement, even whether or not people realize it. But my point is, there are obviously two major ways to do that. There's the private land, the land use, so which is what we've spent most of today's podcast talking about, how it should look and how that should function. And then there's the streetscape, which in almost every case is owned by the city.
Mm-hmm.
And the perfect mix of an urbanist neighborhood would have perfected both. Like you were talking about with Carmel, maybe they perfected the architecture, but maybe not the streetscape. And there are some modern developments that have, like I was in a development from the 70s that had a fantastic, all the front doors faced these long parks with no streets, but the buildings were from the 70s. They look like garbage.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, but working towards that perfect combination, I don't think there's any question in a city like LA, it's going to take a long time. It's going to take decades. And I think that of those two things, the thing that can change the faster is the streetscape, because the city owns it. The city has street budgets, they repave. It's very easy for the city to build a separated bike path like this, like plan it, fund it, build it in a year. Whereas if you change the zoning, first of all, you're going to get a lot more resistance, I think, than the streetscape.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even once you change it, like it'll take decades for developers to fill in every lot with whatever new zoning you've imagined. And so that's why I think, and by the way, I'm an e-bike guy. Like I'm not a bike guy because I live in a very hilly area in Santa Barbara, and I was never able to ride a normal bike there, an acoustic bike, as I call it.
Right.
So I think e-bikes have the ability to truly replace people's cars while we're waiting on the land use changes, which may never come. Like the neighborhood where my parents live, I don't think it's ever going to be a mixed use, dare I even say walkable neighborhood. Like I think it will forever be, because the homes are worth too much for people to want that to change because of what's happened with home values. But like everyone in my neighborhood could theoretically, like I do, ride an e-bike, ride a cargo bike to the Vons, which is only a mile away, and get their groceries. And there's an elementary school that's close enough, and the beach is close enough, where it's like, I think that is a much easier sell to people too, than like, not your whole neighborhood's going to change and there's going to be a corner store and there's going to be an apartment building, and there's a much easier sell is, hey, try out an e-bike, try out a cargo bike, see if you can pick up your groceries and your kids with this. And I think not just bikes made this point. It's $4,000. You're never going to have to buy gas, right? So there's like even an economic thing where you can say, hey, if you don't have your car anymore, you can turn your garage into an ADU or whatever. So that's why I'm so stoked on e-bikes. And what I've seen is that even the older people in my neighborhood, there's an older couple that lives near me. Both of them got e-bikes. I see them biking to the market all the time. When I talk to them about land use, they think I'm out of my mind. They're like, why would you want our neighborhood to change? So like, that's why I think biking is maybe that bridge. Anyway, so I don't know what your reaction is to that, but that's my selling point.
I got the compromise. Okay.
Yes.
Golf carts. Everyone just drives their golf cart to the
But why golf carts then? If you could
because they're open. You can still talk to people. You're not isolated in your little pod. It only can go like 15 miles per hour.
No, I think you're missing my point though, because golf carts, first of all, they take up a bunch of space. They're still like at least $10,000. They're not good uphills. I tried to bring someone up a hill on an e-golf cart. Okay, another fun fact that viewers are going to learn about me. I worked for a company that rented out e-scooters and e-golf carts to tourists. And one time they wanted to go up the hill in Santa Barbara, actually near where I live, and the whole thing stopped working halfway up the hill. And we almost rolled. backwards. No, but I think biking too, you have all the health benefits.
No,
They
I
take up way
agree.
less space.
No, I agree. I think that especially when you were talking about like bike mania in the 1890s and everything, I think that's because America was, even before the suburbanization of America, which we say is like the 50s and 60s, there was kind of like a first stage of suburbanization in like the 1880s, 1890s. You were kind of emulating what was going on in Great Britain at the time. The Victorian suburbs of London were pretty much the first metropolitan suburbs in the world. And then we kind of took that and really ran with it, which is why we have such a thing as the streetcar suburb. It's why we invented the electric streetcar, because we built neighborhoods that you couldn't just, you live in a home and you couldn't just walk to work anymore. So that's why the streetcar was invented. And I guess that's why the bike really lends itself really nicely to that sort of American style, but still pre-war single family home neighborhood. So I can definitely see your point as to how the bike specifically works with the American style of city life. But at the same time, I just feel like we are in a country where most people live a sedentary lifestyle, which I know your point is like we want people to be healthier, but a lot of people live a sedentary lifestyle because they're also pretty lazy. I just think that it's hard to sell to people like, hey, you know how you're really lazy and don't like to exercise? Well, here's a way that you can exercise and, not be lazy. It's like, wait, I just want to be in my car. I just want to sit all day, basically.
I think there's always going to be those people, right?
One day,
there's always going to...
Yeah, that's true. But everyone's been on like a date where, like, this has happened to me so many times where I'll go on a date with like my fiance, and I'll park like 10 spots away from like the entrance of the building. She's like, "Oh, now we have to walk all this way." And I know that that's not just me. I know that's everyone's experience.
To her credit, it is through a parking lot.
This is true. But I've had that experience with other people too, because I do tend to like to park a little farther away. I don't mind a little walk. That's just me. But yeah, I just think that the culture is just not there to get people to think that, okay, I have to completely transform my life and pedal everywhere. Even though like I agree with you about the principle of it, I just don't think that's the bridge. You know what I mean?
I disagree. I will disagree. I'll prove it to you. You're going to visit me, come to my neighborhood, and you'll see people are adopting the e-bike. No, really, in a big way. Like I would say maybe 20%. I mean, the data still has to come out, but I'm seeing everyone, kids, parents, like I said, older people, everyone's doing it. And you know what everyone is not doing? Advocating for more housing. In fact, they're advocating against it.
Right.
Look, and then once you get a critical mass of these older people, especially e-biking, suddenly they realize where the dangerous intersections are. They're asking city council in the same way that they complain about housing. They're complaining that the street isn't safe enough.
Right. Well, when you get people out of their car and
I've seen that. Like I've talked to these people who I know are diehard NIMBYs, and they'll say, you know what, we really need a crosswalk over here or whatever it is. Then again, maybe I have this California bias. I'm sure I do.
Yeah, it's a bit different.
It's sunny like 320 days of the year where I live, so like it's not.
But no, that's still the case. So yeah, Alex, I agree that there's lots of people who will not even like play with the idea of I'm going to use a bike now and completely change the way I get around my community. Like there's tons of people who that's what they're going to do. They're like, no, I'm not doing that. Fuck the bikers. I'm not getting on a bike. I don't want to. I'm lazy and I don't care. But the thing is, there's a lot of people who will. There's even if the cohort is only 10 to 20% who will even entice the idea and use it occasionally. That's a cohort of people that otherwise wouldn't be doing it at all. And I think it just comes back to that. If you build it, they will bike. And that's exactly what you'll see. If you make it safer, some amount of people will start to bike more and more, and that modal share rises, which, it has to come with some interventions that a lot of people don't like, especially if they drive, like modal filters and traffic calming. But I don't know. That's just
I think Houghton is the thing that proves our point to Alex the best, right? Because in Houghton, you have a sample size of people who want to live in a suburb. Like they specifically do not want to live in Utrecht. They want to live in a suburb. They want to commute to work, which is something I would want to do over that distance. And I wrote my thesis on Houghton because what I said is you have this basically quote unquote normal. It's as American as you can get in terms of people who want to live out in the house, but it's in the Netherlands. And so they literally designed it so that the intuitive choice is to ride your bike. Almost every house in Houghton either has a garage or an assigned parking spot, which is definitely not the case in the middle of a Dutch city, right? So like the car ownership rate actually in Houghton is like 500 per thousand, which is very similar to an American suburb, which is like 600 per thousand. I looked up all this data. So like, okay, everyone owns a car basically the same rate we do. And yet non-car mode share for trips within Houghton, which is a city of 50,000, is 63% non-car. And it's about 20 to 30% bike specifically. And then the rest is walking and transit. And again, it's not because they brainwashed people, begged them to ride bikes. It's not because people self-selected as like cyclists when they moved there. Like if anything, they selected to be not city dwellers. And what they did is they just made it so that the simplest connections between the schools, the homes, and the marketplaces are bike paths, whereas the roads are physically like 3 times as long. But there's parking at each end. So like the best sort of petri dish that you could ask for, because it didn't even exist before 1970. So it's all brand new. And you know, people bike. People who are not cyclist enthusiasts by any stretch, they bike because that's just how you get to school. That's the easiest thing to do. And so I think, and I read a great paper about how we could sort of retrofit American suburbs, or at least design them to be that way. And so that people unconsciously, the same way that they unconsciously make the choice to drive now, because that's just the simplest way to get around, they'll unconsciously make the choice to bike the exact same way because, oh, the bike path is the fastest way to the market. Like, of course I'm going to bike there, which is what people there do.
Oh, you know what? I'm going to be on. Okay, I got to say, I just love listening to Sully go off about Houghton because I absolutely love that city. I'm going to be in Houghton on like Saturday, I think, on Friday.
Oh my God.
I'm just going to pass through it, really. I'm going to spend some time in Utrecht. But anyway, sorry, Alex, I cut you off there.
No, it's fine. That's cool. So how long are you going to be in the Netherlands for?
Oh, like 2 weeks, I think.
Oh, that's
doing
awesome.
a huge bike tour. I did a bike tour. If you don't know, I did a bike tour for like 6 days. It was like around Randstad. So like Amsterdam to Haarlem along the coast, down to The Hague, and then Rotterdam up through Utrecht, and then back to Amsterdam. And a ton of Dutch people were like, "You didn't cycle around the Netherlands. That's just Randstad, blah, blah, blah." So now I'm doing a giant, it's like literally 3 times the distance, massive
Dude,
tour.
That is Dutch people. My comments are the same. Dutch people are like,
they're a bit
very
pedantic.
particular.
Very pedantic.
They're particular, yeah.
Yeah.
Are you going to Maastricht?
Yeah, that's at the end, the very end. I'm not cycling there. I'm just taking the train down there before I go to Germany. Yeah.
Understandable. Yeah.
But have you got some good things to say about Maastricht?
Well, I actually haven't been, but I really want to go. I've heard about it's like this hidden gem of a city, but it's just like kind of out of the way of everything. So I really would want to go though. I've heard great things.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's so I'm visiting my friends at the end in Germany. They live kind of close to that area, and that's like the Dutch. When they go to the Netherlands, they just go to Maastricht. They love it there. They do their vacations there. It's Limburg, the very south kind of peninsula. Not peninsula, but you know what I mean. It looks like a peninsula if it was separated, but yeah, it's that tri-border area: Belgium, Germany, and Netherlands. Yeah.
Okay. Right. That's like the one spot that has hills in the whole country, right?
Yeah, a bit in the east north, but yeah, it's the hillier part.
Right.
But on that note, we're getting to the end here. Is there anything else you want to ask Alex, or anything Alex wants to say?
Well, I was kind of giving an answer to what you guys were talking about for the bikes. I agree that it's obviously preferable to cars, but I still feel like you're kind of we lived in a world where people got around by foot, or I guess by horse, and then by transit. And then we became a world where people got around by cars. And what you're advocating for is a world where people get around by bikes. Like you said, like it would just be the intuitive choice. But is there a way where the intuitive choice is to walk and for all these things to apply? And I think the answer is yes. And the best example I've seen, I know people freak out because it's a super wealthy neighborhood, but it's Hampstead in London, right? So when you go to Hampstead in London, people live in these massive houses, big backyards and everything, but everyone walks. The high street is like half a mile away at most, and you can take the tube train, get into the city within 20 minutes, and your neighborhood is quiet and pleasant, and your high street is bustling and full of every amenity you can ever need. And no one is riding a bike, but people are walking around. So I do think that it actually is possible to get all these things right, but thinking more about the people moving by foot or by train, which I do think is ultimately the best option between that and biking, just because it's the least demanding of people, right? It's pleasant to walk. Anyone can walk. Well, most people can walk, obviously. And obviously, to ride a train, you just have to be standing or sitting in a train. So I think that's the most optimal, because that's the way I think that maximizes productivity. So, for example, the least productive mode of transport is the car. And to give you an example, I have a job right now where it takes me about an hour and a half to drive to work, and about an hour and 10 minutes to get back home. And it's like, I have a lot of things to do in my life, a lot of responsibilities. And yet in that 2.5 hour period, I can't do a single thing but drive. And obviously biking is much better, but it still is sort of like that. Whereas if I just have to walk somewhere for 10 minutes, or I can just be on the train, I can at least like get some things done, hang out, relax.
The only thing you gain from biking, obviously there's health benefits in that, but that's just it. Like if you're going to work out in the evening, you don't have to otherwise. But
exactly.
You're right. Yeah, that's like.
By the way, I admire the health benefits and everything, but I do think that there is if you had to design a city around one mode of transport, it should be people's 2 feet, and it is possible to have that, and for people to live in single family homes, it really is.
There's a density. Again, I disagree with you, because when you say that we used to design cities for people to walk, yes, but do you know how big those cities were in terms of population? Right. I mean, the biggest cities in Europe pre-1800 were like 100,000 people.
Right.
And by the way, they were cramped. Like, people had to live close, because there was. I mean, I'm talking even before transportation was invented. Like, other than horses, which people think. By the way, I know you don't, but a lot of people think that the horse ownership rate was like similar to. No, horses were like something that very few people owned. Like, it was either for your business or like wealthy people. So yeah, the majority of people walked. You're not wrong, but they walked across cities that were like a mile wide. Like, so like your commute, your hour and a half commute is over a distance that couldn't be replaced by walking or by cycling. But my point is that if you look at LA, and I'm helping a nonprofit do this kind of analysis, and you look at the walk shed around a transit stop, it's like half a mile is a 10-minute walk. And we know from all these different studies that I've researched, that I'm putting together, 10 to 15 minutes is about as far as people are willing to walk, even when a street is nice, right? When a street's not nice, it's actually 3 minutes. And the study's Canadian, by the way, Nick, so props to you guys.
Nice.
So, but however, a bike, which people are willing to spend 15 minutes getting to a transit stop, is the point of all these studies that I made. So walking, that's about half a mile, 3/4 of a mile if you're young. If you're biking, a 15-minute radius is 3 miles. So it expands the service area of the transit stop. So like, unless you're going to put high quality transit, like the D-line tunnel version of a subway that goes faster than driving, unless you're going to stagger that every half mile, which will cost billions of dollars, and even in New York, they don't have that, then what you have to have is a city where people walk for short trips, where they bike for medium trips, and where they take transit for region level trips. And again, the lifestyle, and I actually spent an entire month and a half in Hampstead. I did a home exchange there. So I lived.
Really?
Yeah, I lived within walking distance. I did it 2 different summers, and we did a home exchange. So it was totally free. It was fantastic. They came and stayed in our house in Santa Barbara, and I walked to that high street every day. I know exactly what you're talking about. At the same time, even the nicest houses in Hampstead are still attached. And they're attached homes. There's 2x2, a lot of them, but there's some weird aversion Americans have to having a shared wall. I don't know what it is. You can go and look at the townhomes that are being built in the way out in the boonies of the Bay Area in LA. I'm not joking, they're 2 feet apart. Like, people could pass ketchup. They could be like, hey, could I have some ketchup? And you could. So I don't know what that's about. So my point is, like, and you talked about how like the streetcar suburb really was the earliest example of single family homes, but it was streetcar based. But my point is that, like, if people are not willing to change their lifestyles in terms of the built environment, there are some of the homes that are like 2x2.
Yeah, there's one part where I think they're a little more separated, though.
As far as I know, my neighbors are not. Like, they are not willing to live in an attached house. That's just how they think. And I'm sure most people in the Valley, most people in LA think that. Then cycling is the thing that transforms the neighborhood without transforming the neighborhood. If that makes sense. Like biking is the thing that can unlock that 3 mile distance without asking people to vastly change how their neighborhood looks. Whereas the walking, you're going to have to change how it looks. Like, that's just, So
Right.
and
No,
I
I agree
agree
with
with you.
that.
Like I love these old walkable. We have to remember these old walkable cities in the center of European cities, like the one in Antwerp. That's back when Antwerp was a city of like 60,000 people. Like,
Right.
so like I think you need, like I really do think you need cycling. I don't think it's a nice to have. Like I think it's a need. Is that one house
Right.
or is that?
Yeah, there's some parts where I think it's like one, but yeah, you're right. Most
Yeah,
of it
well, yeah,
is
I'm talking about the
attachable. Yeah.
wealthiest people in London, and I bet, and I guarantee you, these people. Look at this truck. These people are probably the
I
only
know.
people in London that drive anywhere.
Oh my God. Yeah.
They're probably the ones that pay the congested pricing. You know, like
They're
probably
not
are.
driving either, by the way. It's someone else driving for them, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
So it's
what
but
a
anyways,
lovely.
that's my
Yeah.
hill I will
Mhm.
die on for sure.
It looks
Right.
lovely out there.
No, I think you're right that like for the neighborhoods that we have, like we're not going to rip everything down and just replace it with the way I would want it. So for that reason, I definitely understand what you're saying and agree.
Like if
I
we
will say
build,
though,
yeah, go ahead. I was
Oh,
going to
yeah,
say,
I
if we
mean, like-
build great bike infrastructure within 3 miles of our transit stops, that's going to be a lot more effective than waiting for the zoning to change to be walkable.
right.
Or
I will
building
also
more.
say that you got into like one of my kind of grand theories about actually not just city design, but like country design, which is that a country with multiple small cities is far better than a country with just one really big city. And I think you'll actually see a correlation between countries that have multiple centers of commerce versus just like one big metropolis in terms of quality of life, but also just efficiency. So I think about a country like Malaysia or Indonesia, and they have like that one massive metropolis, like whether it's Kuala Lumpur or Jakarta. And it's like, those are some rough cities to live in, you know? Whereas you take a country like, like, say what you will about America, we have like 30 different cities that each have their own prominence, and it makes us so much stronger for it. But then the ultimate version of that is a place like the Netherlands. And this is a really interesting stat. If you overlay the LA mega region on top of the Netherlands, going from Amsterdam to Rotterdam is like if I were to like go to Long Beach, which is just insane to think about. Like the idea that like just going from the San Fernando Valley to Long Beach is the same as going across like 2 whole regions in the Netherlands is crazy. And yet in that same span of distance, you have more people, you have farmland, you have these different towns, different cities. It's so much more interesting, cultural, and also just more efficient. And yet, and I know that it's denser obviously over there, but plenty of people in the Netherlands, even in that region, live in single family homes or whatever. And also a lot of people in LA live in small apartments. So it is interesting how that works. And I do think that I get what you're saying about like all these cities used to be smaller and everything, but I actually think that was the preferable way of
No, I
organizing
agree.
society.
No, I'm not
Yeah.
disagreeing with that. I think, no, you're totally right. Your theory is right. But I work in
Mhm.
urban planning, and like 95% of the projects we do are retrofitting. Like we're pretty much stuck with the cities we have in America.
Yeah.
Like we've built out. There is not a single flat piece of land within a 2-hour drive of downtown LA that doesn't have a house or something on it. So unless we're going to build brand new cities, which is a whole controversial topic of its own, and our population is not growing that much anymore, so that wouldn't even make that much sense. I come from a perspective of retrofit. Like I think your theory is beyond a doubt. Like no, you're totally right. Like we should have smaller cities, whatever. Too late. Like it's too late. The entire LA metro, like the San Fernando Valley shouldn't exist. Like that 3 million people spread that thin across that big of an area makes no sense at all. But it does exist. That's where the bike infrastructure comes into me. Like it's like that's where it's like there's nowhere it's too late. Like that would have been great. Like I fantasize as I fall asleep at night about if I was in LA in 1900, I would have picked exactly what you're saying. I would have picked probably 6 nodes for there to be towns and preserve the farmland in between them. But that's not what happened. So we're kind of stuck. Like I said, we're stuck doing analyses where I do analyses where I'm like, how am I going to get people to use this transit stop? I can either put really nice walking infrastructure within a half mile, or I can try and get fantastic bike infrastructure within a 3-mile radius. And that's going to get people to use it. That's going to get people out of cars far more effectively than trying to make those places walkable. At the same time, of course, I do think the zoning needs to be like a granularized and broken down so that corner stores and things can exist. But overall, like 200 years from now, if LA, if America still exists, whatever, like the vast majority of Angelenos are not going to live within walking distance of their work.
Right.
Like it's never going to happen. Like you're going to need transit and bikes, basically.
Right. No,
Yeah.
you're right. It's a lot harder to fix than it is to adapt. So I definitely understand that.
So yeah, that's the point. Anyway, we're at an hour 20. It's a pretty long show for us. And I haven't eaten dinner, by the
I
way.
didn't mean to.
Yeah, this has been a long one, eh? Longest one in a long time. But this has been an excellent conversation. I feel like we're gonna have to continue this sometime in the future.
Absolutely.
You guys could have like a full debate.
And here's what I'm thinking. I almost asked you this today, but I knew you were busy earlier. But I'm thinking we do an in-person. Have you ever done, Nick, an in-person interview on Radio Free Urbanism?
I don't think so. Not yet. I mean, I might be doing a couple and then this next week, but yeah.
So we'll
If
be
you're in LA, let's do it, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
You
We're
guys
in
should do
LA.
it.
Why not? We can have this debate. It's such a good debate, and it's such a good faith debate. Like, I feel like I'm not arguing with a NIMBY. I'm arguing with a fellow urbanist. It's like such a good, and it's fascinating. And like I said, you're bringing up points that I agree with, 100%. So like, great time.
Awesome.
No, but
I look
I'm
forward
also
to
learning
that.
a lot from you, though. So.
Oh, thank you.
This is going to be great. Okay, sweet. All right. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. So can you just shout out anything you want to plug right now? Where to find you? Go ahead.
Yeah, you can check my channel out at Alexander Rotmensz. So that's Rotmensz. It's honestly a miracle that I even have a following with that last name, but that's
all right. And Sully, where can the people find you?
At Sullyville. You are two guys who picked your names to be your channel names, but I did not do that.
It's Sullyville's pretty good. I think that's pretty wide scope. Mine's just my name because I thought I could pivot if I felt like it. I didn't pigeonhole myself. Anyway, my name is Nick Laporte. You can find me at Nick the Door on Instagram, YouTube, and Blue Sky. This has been Radio Free Urbanism. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, what do we say? Two wheels good.
Transit. What was it? Transit good? I don't know that one. That's not my line.